Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA for the weekend of January 20th, 2017. The Jeff Bagwell Makes the Hall of Fame edition. In this episode, I'm joined by Mr. Translations himself, Jay Rosen. As always, we talk about Jeff Bagwell being admitted to or selected for the Hall of Fame, the stunning Rolls-Royce $800 million global settlement, the Orthofix recidivist FCPA enforcement action, the finalization and continuation of the Las Vegas Sands FCPA enforcement action. This week announced the criminal enforcement action by the Department of Justice. I look at Jay's question posed on how companies would consider resolutions either during the prior Obama administration or the current Trump administration, by noting that in the past 3 weeks, settlements were greater than all of 2016. We take a look at the NFL Conference Championships for the weekend, and Jay tells us that he hasn't decided what will be on his weekend update. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to This Week in FCPA. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I am joined, as always, by my good friend and colleague, Mr. Translations, Jay Rosen, and we are here for This Week in FCPA for the week ending January 20th, and this is the Jeff Bagwell in the Hall of Fame edition. So, with that, Jay, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. It is a rainy 49 degrees here in Encino, WSA, the Western States of America. We are crying here because of today's date, but I'm certain that you and I will be able to bring some ethics and compliance sunshine to our listeners.
Well, then I will not tell you it's 72 and sunny here in Houston. But it is sunny because we have had our second Houston Astro selected for the Hall of Fame, and that is Jeff Bagwell. For those who really are not aware, Bagwell actually is a native New Englander, and the Boston Red Sox graciously gave us Jeff Bagwell for a one-half season of Larry Anderson. So on behalf of all Houston baseball fans everywhere, thank you, Jay.
You're so welcome.
So, but there is something else in addition to the most lopsided trade in the history of Major League Baseball ever that I'd like to point out, which is there's a couple of things that Jeff Bagwell credits as making him a Hall of Famer, and I really think, Jay, they lend or lead to a discussion about why the compliance community is so different than other business units, business communities, etc. You've certainly written about this, but Jeff Bagwell credited Ozzie Smith, the great St. Louis shortstop, who offered him a defensive tip when he just came to Houston. When he was in the Red Sox organization, Bagwell played third base, and he switched to first because Houston had Ken Caminetti playing third at the time. And he in a game while Smith was on first, Smith asked him how his defense was coming at first. And the question was, how's it going playing first? And Bagwell told him that he was struggling with his backhand. And while Ozzie Smith was on first, he said, well, what you need to do is you're taking the ball too far back, and you need to put your backhand out in front of yourself. So here was a competitor, not a first baseman, giving him a tip. The second thing was from Tony Gwynn. And Tony Gwynn helped him with his batting stance. And the help was that Bagwell was continually tinkering with his stance, and Gwynn's message was, keep the same stance. And Gwynn had a very unique stance, and Bagwell ended up having one. But Bagwell used that advice as well, and it really points to how we in the compliance community help each other, work with each other, share best practices. There are no trade secrets in compliance. Certainly people don't talk about any investigations or confidential information to their company, but you can pretty much call up any other chief compliance officer and find out how they may have dealt with the situation or what their thoughts are on effective practices. So it really drove home to me something that I think you have articulated in your LinkedIn post, that we're really a community, and compliance is a community, and that community desires to further compliance, just like Smith and Tony Gwynn helped Bagwell further his career. So that's how Jeff Bagwell and the Hall of Fame all relate to compliance.
I think that's a great point, Tom. I mean, a lot of the things that we're talking about is continuous improvement, and it's not a just invented here kind of thing, and that's what we see. I think that's why we believe it's so important to get out and connect in person with other ethics and compliance professionals, regardless of what industry or vertical they're in. But there are tips that, you can share when you're standing on first base and talking to the opposing defender. So I love those stories. Those are great. Thanks for sharing them.
So, Jay, we had really I wouldn't say an extraordinary week, because we've had an extraordinary 6 weeks of FCPA and indeed global anti-corruption enforcement. But we had a really stunning case this week come out of the United Kingdom, and that, of course, is the Rolls-Royce global anti-corruption enforcement action. And I say global because it entailed an enforcement action from the United Kingdom under the UK Bribery Act and the prior Bribery Act, or the prior bribery laws, I should say, in the United States under the FCPA, in Brazil under the Clean Companies Act and its predecessors. So we had 3 enforcement actions in 3 separate countries, and really a stunner, particularly when you consider the name Rolls-Royce, although this was not the automobile manufacturer, this was the jet engine and energy engine manufacturer. So what are some of your initial thoughts from the Rolls-Royce settlement?
I think what you're pointing out there is not only are we going beyond the step of cooperating in investigations, but this seems to be a new high water mark in cooperating in joint prosecutions and resolutions. So I know part of what we've been worried about over the last quarter since the election is what do we see happening with the DOJ and what do we see happening with the SEC, and will their attention be directed elsewhere by the new leadership in the incoming administration? And I think we've really, over the past several years, kind of lit that fire about not only joint cooperation from an investigation perspective, but joint prosecution. And, it's great, I think, from the perspective of the SFO and the UK Bribery Act for them to come down with this major case that they've been investigating for almost the past decade and a half. It takes place, bribery all over the world, Thailand, Brazil, Azerbaijan, Angola, Iraq. So any of the hot spots on the CPI index, it seems like they were involved there. So I think with the new administration starting off today, it would be kind of hard for us to dial back the positions that we've taken in terms of why, bribery is a bad thing. So I'm really heartened by this decision. And as you saw this week and, the 3 blog posts that you wrote, it's a very meaty resolution and there's lots of good points to draw from it.
Really, the deferred prosecution agreement out of the United Kingdom I found was the most interesting, at least so far for me, Jay, because there you have a different DPA system. You have court oversight and court approval of the DPA. Certainly you don't have that here in the United States. And so you have the court taking a look at the specific provisions of the deferred prosecution agreement and whether it's in the interest of the public, in addition to the interest of justice, that the DPA be approved. So the court goes through a very detailed analysis down to the specific fines and penalty components, where they looked at the range of fines and penalties to determine whether Rolls-Royce paid an appropriate amount. But I was also very intrigued with the court's very frank discussion about really what is justice around for a corporation, and how that, if you take that with the intersection of how a corporation really relates to the greater public. So here you have a hugely important and successful English entity, the Rolls-Royce Limited, which manufactures jet engines for sale literally across the world. Also have a huge energy division, lots of jobs, lots of money comes into the United Kingdom. Yet they clearly had a massive 20-year bribery scheme in place. So the court has to weigh what they've done versus the destruction of the company. And it really took that to heart and talked about the reasons that you want to have a successful Rolls-Royce Limited, but you want to have them paying for the criminal actions that they had engaged in, and indeed through profit disgorgement, paying that money back to both or primarily to the English government. So very interesting case. The revelations are still coming out. I'm still exploring it, and we're going to have to see where this may take us.
And, again, on a lot of these matters that we're seeing wrapped up, I don't know, I think you said in one of your blogs about somebody finally getting old-time religion, and I don't know if it was regard to this matter or one of the other resolutions, but, when you see these successful results, and although paying $800 million is not truly a success. To your point earlier, the corporate entity survives. And when these resolutions come down, you see a commitment both not only to cooperate, but also to remediate. And, Lord Gold was, involved in this matter here. He was the monitor through the remediation, and I believe he's going to continue forward. So it really seems that, past criticisms about the SFO, taking their time and not being really effective, I think with the limited resources they had, it would seem that this case was really taking up a lot of time and a lot of bandwidth. So I'm very happy with the result that they've gotten, and, look forward to this offering more transparency and clarity as into what is expected under the UK Bribery Act in terms of having, an appropriate compliance program and actually, doing due diligence and, working best practices into the life of the business.
Yes, very well put, and it will certainly move the conversation of compliance forward by moving the ball of best practices forward. Unfortunately, Jay, we had another recidivist enforcement action this week involving the company Orthofix. So anything that stuck out for you in that case?
Well, it's another great corporation from Texas, right?
Absolutely.
I think you and I were just speaking briefly before we got on the line, and this is, if you can help me, just for our listeners, the instrument that was used to settle this was an administrative order, right, and they're paying disgorgement. Where does that differ in terms of either NPA or DPA, just for those people who are non-lawyers?
So, first of all, this was a civil action, not a criminal action. And when you have a deferred prosecution agreement, that generally involves some type of criminal action where it's going to be delayed or deferred and subject to the entity completing the terms. On a non-prosecution agreement, it's simply that, not prosecuting something. When you have an administrative action under the SEC, as I understand it, it's a civil action. There can be continuing obligations. I think the company has agreed to retain an independent compliance consultant for 1 year to review and test its ongoing FCPA program, solely around the accounting provision, i.e. books and records and internal controls. So the No criminal action here, although that was part of a 2012 deferred prosecution agreement under the Department of Justice. Really no information as to why this one wasn't a violation of that DPA, but nevertheless, a slap on the hand for yet another Texas company.
So can we equate an NPA with a declination, or a declination is that there are no obligations, but an NPA may have obligations? Is that correct?
Yes, and a declination further is either broken down into there are no facts which would substantiate a prosecution, or the prosecutor within the prosecution within its discretion is declining to bring charges. So a declination can be there are no facts which would support a claim, and it can be a prosecutor believing there are facts, nevertheless deciding not to move forward. But it generally involves no obligations going forward, whereas you can have obligations in an NPA, and you certainly can have obligations in an administrative procedure, as we see in Orthofix.
Great, thank you for clearing that up. So we had another one just come through. Right, actually, the press release, I think, when I saw it on the computer, said January 20th because it was that time in the East Coast. But yesterday, Las Vegas Sands agreed to pay $7 million to resolve an FCPA criminal probe, rather. And they had previously agreed in April 2016 to settle FCPA civil charges brought by the SEC. So I don't think this was really a surprise, and it was actually related to conduct at their gaming operations in Macau, and also dealing with getting players to come over from the PRC. So again, this was a situation where management who was involved time has been cleaned out. So there's been new people brought in. The rules have been clarified about how to better account for bringing over high rollers and getting them involved in the operation. And with the company's cooperation, they did receive a 25% reduction off the bottom line in the sentencing guidelines. So those are kind of like the quick hits on my part. And anything else on your mind about Sands?
Well, it's really, I found it a little bit different than your average case, Jay. First of all, typically you have both civil and criminal penalties settled contemporaneously, and here we did not. We had the civil penalty, as you correctly noted, brought last April with a $9 million penalty, and this is criminal penalties. Of $7 million, so 16 total paid. The other things were that the Sands had been alerted to the conduct at issue, and both a finance department employee and an outside auditor had warned the Sands that some of the money paid to a consultant could not be accounted for, and Sands terminated that employee. So, that's obviously when you fire a whistleblower. Retaliation, exactly. Nevertheless, Sands did cooperate. They did hire a new general counsel, hire new heads of internal audit and compliance. The company set up a new board of directors compliance committee and increased compliance and accounting budgets. So hopefully this one puts all of those issues behind, for Sands behind them, and they can move forward. But the other interesting thing was this. If you read the press release, it was not Leslie Caldwell who announced it, because she has left the Department of Justice. And this would be the last settlement under the prior administration. So that brings me to something.
I'm shocked.
Yes, that brings me to something that you posed back on a podcast in December. And you ended up writing a post about it. And the question you posed was, should companies settle with the then current DOJ FCPA leadership or wait until January 20th? And Jay, I think that question was answered because over the past 3 weeks, we have seen all over $15 billion in settlements of criminal and civil actions since, like I said, since December 23rd. That actually, 20 billion, I'll get it right in a minute. And that exceeded the 15.3 billion in fiscal 2016. So in 3 weeks, the DOJ and SEC exceeded the settlement. And I really thought it was for a couple of reasons. First of all, companies knew who they were negotiating with and really what to expect with DOJ and SEC representatives under the now prior administration. And whatever you might think of the incoming administration, no one really knows what to expect. Jeff Sessions will probably be confirmed as Attorney General, and Mr. Clayton will probably be confirmed as the head of the SEC, but certainly we don't have any information, or they have not publicly spoken on what their views on enforcement may be. There are not the other political appointees. The Leslie Caldwells and the Sally Yates have all resigned, so we don't know who or what positions will be filled and when they'll be filled. So as far as knowing who you're dealing with, that I think was certainly one key factor. The second is timing. If you did not settle with the SEC or DOJ, you may be waiting a long time to settle, because these new heads of the agencies and departments are going to have to get up to speed on a lot of matters. All of the secondary appointees and any new people that come in will have to get up to speed. So it could be a 3 to 6 month period before any substantive settlements are approved at the highest level. And here I'm thinking of Walmart and the Goldman Sachs investigation around 1MDB. And these are things that corporations are very sensitive to, but even more so, with greater sensitivity, are the capital markets. Every time a company settles a case, an FCPA case, there's actually a bump in their stock price. And the bump is, it really doesn't matter what the settlement is, there's a bump because it's certainty. And once you know whatever your fine and penalty is, you can reserve for it and you can plan for it. And that's what the markets respond to, is resolution and certainty. So kudos for asking the question in December. But I think we got a pretty firm answer, Jay, that companies really moved as hard and as fast and as strongly as they could to resolve these before the new administration came in.
Yeah, well, thank you. I guess, what do they say? Every once in a while, a squirrel finds a nut. So I'm glad I was on track for that one. I think the one thing that's just puzzling to me is that, you have a large company, they in their quarterly filings, their updates, they say they have set aside a certain amount for investigation purposes and resolution purposes. So I'm still just a little bit, wondering, do you think it's market timing that when the surety comes and the resolution happens, that they would need more of a bump going into Q1 or Q2 of this year? Or, especially with some of those companies that you mentioned that have been under investigation for 3 or 4 years plus, it would seem like that you really are rolling the dice with the new administration.
I think the bump comes whenever you settle, but the sooner, obviously, you can settle, the quicker you're going to get that bump. So that's
so it's
capital markets.
So do you think it's really coming down to a negotiation of the terms of the language that's going to go out of that final dollar figure? Because it's a little bit reminiscent about how Avon took it to the press and was negotiating in public, and I'm not sure how well that worked out for them.
Well, it's pretty easy. They proposed an $11 million settlement, and they got a $135 million resolution. So draw your own conclusions from that.
Yeah. Well, so it certainly will be interesting moving forward. As we're coming to the end of our blog, our podcast, I'll let you go off first with your thoughts on the AFC and NFC conference championships.
Well, So, of course, everyone knows that my subliminal messaging on the Cowboys apparently did not reach the coaching staff, who let Green Bay blow out to a 21-3 lead before catching up in the second half. I won't put Aaron Rodgers' throw or the catch on the Cowboy coaching staff because that was just amazing. So we've got Green Bay at Atlanta. And I think Atlanta probably learned a couple of things from watching the Cowboys. The first is if the Packers are in a prevent defense the entire game, just run the ball down their throats. Plus, I don't think Rodgers can score as much as Atlanta can. I don't think Green Bay defense is going to be good enough. So on the NFC side, I'm taking Atlanta over Green Bay. And as we get to the premier game for us, will be New England and Pittsburgh. New England looked surprisingly rusty against Houston, except that Houston, in spite of the fact we had the Brockster at quarterback, Houston also had the best defense in the NFL, and they showed that against New England. And if Tom Brady cannot step up into the pocket to make his throws, he's going to have trouble. And that's what Houston was extraordinarily good at. Without J.J. Watt, it's the rush up the middle, or as we would say, the A-gap, which causes, which Houston was able to use to disrupt Brady. Even though New England covered, Houston played a much better game, particularly on the defensive side this time. But, of course, we did have the Brockster, so I don't think the end was ever in doubt. Nevertheless, I don't think Pittsburgh has as strong a defense as the Texans did. And with a week for Belichick to beat on the troops, that they nearly blew it to the worst team in the playoffs, coupled with his innate genius and what they learned from the Texans game, I'm going to take the Patriots over the Steelers.
All right, and you forgot the most important thing that Coach Belichick said is that he doesn't watch Snapbook or Face Chat, so he doesn't care what Antonio Brown is broadcasting live from the Steelers locker room after their victory last week.
Well, I would just suggest he needs to check in with Eminem and really have a look from them.
Yeah, so I reluctantly agree with you on the Atlanta Green Bay game. Somehow I just think that, Aaron Rodgers might be the quarterback of destiny. And, his luck has not, stopped yet. He makes these incredible passes. One of the things that I thought was amazing last week was when they sacked him and he was going back and he had the ball in his throwing hand. And I can't believe he did not fumble. He had such a great grip on that ball. So
the timeout on the way up.
Yeah. So, the Packers are really kind of displaying that New England next man up thing. And to be this successful without Jordy and, Randall Cobb and other people are catching the ball. So I believe it's going to be a high scoring game and it'll be a track meet and it'll be a lot of fun to watch. From the Pats perspective, one thing that was different about their game plan last week against the Texans was LeGarrette Blount was ill and he had the flu for a couple days, so I don't think he ever really got it started. And although Dion Lewis had an amazing game and first guy ever to rush for a TD, catch one, and then run it back on a kickoff, I'm looking for a ground approach against Pittsburgh. And, the thing that's going to be really incumbent upon New England is that we really need to shut down Pittsburgh's running game. And, Pittsburgh also has their killer bees, right? So if we don't I think we can take care of Ben Roethlisberger, but I think the running game is really going to be the key to New England. And as you said, Coach Belichick will have them prepared, and there always seems to be a nice bit of bulletin board fodder there for the Pats. So they perpetually play with a chip on their shoulder, as does Tom Brady. And, hopefully I will continue to wear my Patriots throwback hat up until the Super Bowl. So
I was wondering if, to end up, if you might give us a hint or a taste of the J. Rosen Weekend Report.
We are still undecided, I have to say. I'm going to take in the events of today and see if they affect my thinking on how we're going to be going forward into the new administration. So I think it will have some type of inauguration theme, but I haven't quite fleshed it out yet.
Well, and I would just encourage you to read the FCPA professor today, and a shout out to him for his post. He had some very interesting thoughts on all the corporate money being used to pay for the inauguration and what it might intersect with enforcement going forward.
Well, as soon as we hang out, I will check it out. It's always good to see what the FCPA prof has to say. So thanks for the heads up on that, Tom.
All right, well, have a great weekend. Go Patriots, and we will look forward to visiting with you next week on This Week in FCPA, Jay.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.